I think the grammar comes later, yes. I think it comes little by little. I think that, of course, it's essential.
So what comes first if the grammar comes later?
No, it comes, there's a balance, I think that, but little by little. Yes.
I wonder if I should pursue this line now. This is very interesting. We might get sidetracked. Let's come back to that, because you made a point that I want to emphasize about the role of grammar, particularly at the beginner's stage of learning. Let's go back to the class. Well, let's look at the classroom experiences now. Katie, tell us about your experience.
I learnt Spanish for 8 evenings in an evening course, and we literally had to look and learn the grammar by parrot fashion, trying to remember. And I just personally found that really difficult, actually, to try and memorise. I don't memorise very well, so I found it quite difficult.
So you were memorising the rules, or examples of the rules, or both?
Memorising the actual rules, and then we'd sort of be tested, so we'd sort of be pointed to, and we'd have to remember the end. And it was just, I found that quite stressful.
And that was it? That was all the classes were just looking at
the rest was just sort of speaking, so it was very separate. We had the speaking practice, and then we had the grammar practice. So it was like split up into those 2 sections.
And how do you rate your Spanish after that experience?
My Spanish is terrible, actually. Yeah, it was only 8 evenings as well, so it wasn't.
But that's not a lot.
No.
That's not like 4 years.
No.
Do you think if you'd carried on like that for 4 years, you would have learned Spanish?
I think, it was useful to sort of try and look and visualise the rules, although I prefer to learn just by speaking. Definitely.
And this was not in Spain, this was before coming to Spain?
This was before coming to Spain, yeah.
But since then you've been learning?
Yeah, I've been speaking it a bit, and some of the rules that I read, I have remembered, but I find it easier just to try, and then maybe someone will correct me, and then I'll try and remember it that way.
That's interesting. Yeah. What do you, in your exposure to Spanish now and trying it out, do you notice things that remind you of the rules that you studied before you came? You see what I mean? When you sort of think, yes, that's exactly what we learned in that class back in England or whatever, or is it just like history?
Yeah, there are times when I do remember, although when I was learning it, it was just such a oh my god, this is, I just can't handle this grammar stuff, that I think part of my mind has sort of wiped it out, and I prefer just to try and speak. But I think when I do try and speak Spanish, the grammar's not.
Now, it's interesting, I'm asking that, it's a deliberate reason that somebody did this study which was very interesting. It's been very important in terms of how our researchers and writers think about the teaching of grammar. This guy called Dick Schmidt went to Brazil, and he studied Portuguese for about, I think about 2 or 3 months in a school in Rio. And this is a linguist who's, for some reason, was in Brazil, decided to make a kind of study of his own language learning experiences. And he kept a diary. And so he went to these classes, and initially I think that he was a complete beginner, so he was, kind of picking things up, but it was not dissimilar to the kind of classes that Katie described. It was very, very rule grammar focused, and he got increasingly frustrated because he couldn't seem to be, although he was living in Brazil, he couldn't apply it directly. But anyway, one of the things that did happen was that while he was kind of interacting with Brazilians, he'd suddenly think, yeah, that's what we did in class today. So he was kind of seeing links between what he was learning and what he was using. But eventually he gave up the classes. He just said, this is ridiculous, I can learn more on the street, with friends and bars and restaurants and traveling around, and he did, and his Portuguese really took off. But even then, after these classes, he would still notice things that connected to things that he had learned in the class. And so he hypothesized that although the classroom learning in itself wasn't enough to teach communicative Portuguese, it acted as a kind of advanced organizer, if you like, and helped prime him to notice things that happened when he was really learning it in the street. And he hypothesized, there's no way of proving this, that he might not have been so receptive to noticing these things if he hadn't had that initial So the two things seem to go together. On the one hand, a lot of people can't learn a language simply by sitting down and studying the rules, and that's it. You've got to apply them, so you've got to be using, like Karen did, the language communicatively. On the other hand, there are other people who just learn the language communicatively up to a point, and this is like my Spanish, but it's only going to be limited because I don't have that basis